Hello and welcome to the Last Edit podcast, a weekly film podcast with myself, Citizen Sleeve, and the quite fantastic
Silver Hawkins.
Now, for those who don't know, this is a weekly film podcast where Silver and I exchange different films each week and have a bit of a deep discussion about them once we've watched them. For this week, I've chosen a film that I hold in a little bit of high esteem, but upon rewatching it, it's certainly got its problems, and that is Terry Gilliam's 1985 film Brazil. It's a very unusual film. It's a very surreal film. I'll give very, very quick narrative kind of overview before I pass it over to Silver. So essentially, we're in a very dystopian world, very retrofitted, much like Blade Runner. In fact, it might be the film that has the best retrofitting apart from Blade Runner in that sense. Its aesthetic design is amazing, very, very unique, very Orwellian. And essentially, it's about a guy called Sam Lowry, played by Jonathon Pryce, who works for the Ministry of Intelligence because the Ministry of Information, because information is the most important part of this world. It's what the economy is run on. It's the basis of the society that's been built in somewhere in the 20th century, as they say. So the film kind of bridges that retro to more contemporary feel of the 80s. And he basically works in a subdivision where it's information retrieval, and it's all about trying to get information on people and stop a rebellion that's currently happening in this dystopian future. It's got an amazing cast. Everyone from, like I said, Jonathon Pryce is the lead, to Robert De Niro, to Ian Holm. I mean, list goes on and on and on. You'll find characters from Hello Hello in there. You'll find the one of the prisoners from Porridge in there, one of the British comedies. Like, the whole cast is just a really, really wonderful collection of British actors for the most part, who all play their roles really well, including Michael Palin as well. And it has that undercurrent of Pythonism surrounding its comedy as well. Okay, so I've seen this a fair amount in my life, not consistently, but generally every 7, 8, 9, 10 years, whatever it is. I don't think it had been. I think it must have been 7 or 8 years or more since I'd last seen it since we did. So you'd seen it before, hadn't you? But how long had it been
I
since you've
did.
seen it? What
I
what did
don't.
you
I don't
think of it
even remember how
now?
long it had been. Uh,
It's a long. It was quite a long time for me.
yeah, same here.
I think when
I
DVD
mean,
first released.
the two immediate thoughts is that it's strikingly similar in like tone and production to Wells's The Trial, his
Yeah.
adaptation of Kafka's The Trial, and I mean, it's funny that the movie came out in 1985 because the prior year, 1984, was when 1984, the adaptation of Orwell's novel
John Hurt.
came
Yeah.
out with John Hurt. Yeah, and Brazil is very very similar to that film as well. Like, it's kind of
A
a
lot of
combination.
references and themes. Yeah.
It's kind of a combination of The Trial and 1984 sort of blended together, and then with an added dose of absurdity to it. Um, yeah, I mean, it's kind of a movie that's all over the place. It's very beautifully filmed. There are some really remarkable shots in it. Some really striking cinematography. Like you mentioned, the performances are good. Like, there isn't really an actor who falls through in it. The script is less good. Like, character relationships and so forth, they don't feel particularly natural.
Yeah.
They feel a little forced, and yeah, I mean, it's a movie that's worth watching, even though it starts really really sort of wearing on you a little, wearing on your patience a little bit because it is too long. Uh, it should probably have been trimmed down a bit, but yeah, I mean, it is sort of standard Gilliam with that whole like imagination landscape and fantasy adjacent. I mean, probably like the biggest difference in Brazil to like 1984 and the trial are the dream sequences in which Sam dreams about being a kind of eagle man, like Flash Gordon, taking on Flash Gordon, saving a damsel in distress, that he then seeks out, as you mentioned. Um, yeah, it's a really fun mess.
That's a good way to describe it. It is a fun mess. It's quite disjointed. One problem with the script was the original script was written by Tom Stoppard, and there were three drafts. And Gilliam just wasn't happy with some of the characterizations and some other things. So he brought in one of his friends who was, I think he met him on the set of Life of Brian. I think he's one of the actors who had to, a blind guy had to fall down a hole, and they got to know each other. So he worked on the script, and I think that's why it hasn't got enough focus. That's part of its problem. It's so scattershot that a lot of the characters that are pretty well performed don't have a lot of depth or development to them. The way Gilliam described this film, I watched a documentary not so long ago, was a political cartoon.
Yeah.
He doesn't see it as fantasy or science fiction or any of these other genre labels. He sees it very much as a political cartoon, and you can very much see that. Themes of totalitarianism, of I mean, my God, we're in the middle of the racism, police brutality protests throughout America and across the world now, and just some of the scenes, like even the way the police state, as it were, act, the way they dress, the way they look like darker versions of stormtroopers almost. They look very militarized, as the police do now. So that's quite prophetic in terms of so many years later. I've seen it in lots of other Orwellian-based dramas and films as well. But just the way that bureaucracy has become a systematic norm, and the information about people is worth more than its weight in gold, is exactly where we are now. Bureaucracy is out of control now. It has been for many, many years since this film came out.
Yeah, I mean, even at the time when the film came out, it was.
Oh, very much so. And this, one of the thematics we get throughout the film is paper everywhere, paper trails, forms, the abundance of paperwork on top of paperwork.
Yes. Which is very much the trial.
Yeah, exactly. Jumping ahead a little bit, but there's a character called Jolene that Jonathon Pryce meets, who's actually the girl he's been dreaming about as he's this flying knight looking for an escape and adventure, and also to just run away from his problems, because that's what he does throughout the entire film. He just runs away from his problems. But there's one bit which, my God, I think everyone in modern existence must have experienced. Jolene, played by Kim Kirst, I think. Kirst goes to like the Ministry of Information, goes to the front desk, has some forms she has to get filled out because she has to get something filled out to get something else. And the guy at the desk is like, I think you'll find, I think it's the guy from Hello Hello, actually. I can't remember his name now. Gordon Kay, that's it. And he says, I'm afraid you'll have to go to the Adjustment Bureau just to get that stamped. Well, I've been to the Adjustment Bureau, and they told me they had to come here to get something else stamped. No. You turn to page 27. Yeah, I need a little stamp there. How many times have you got on a phone call with a customer call centre, and you've been bounced around 18 different departments because they can't find out what's supposed to be what, and you end back with the same department who are like, oh, sorry, can't help you. Fuck. So it's very much of that ilk. I think the most fantastic thing about this film is just its visual design. For all its thematics and all its Orwellian ideas and notions, and we'll get into a lot of them in a bit, but just its fantastic design. How it mashes kind of everything from 1940s up to 1970s and later. And the wonderful offices, these really draconian grey buildings with metal trays everywhere and metal tubes, ports, I think Gilliam said when they were first coming up with that aesthetic and they wanted all this metal tubing everywhere, his concept was that usually within an environment, everything below us and surrounding us is hidden. The electrics, the cables, the plumbing, all that stuff is hidden. So what he wanted to do in this film for a lot of it was just expose that and push that into the sight of the viewer so they could see everything in a working process and everything kept breaking down. So I thought that was absolutely and the magnifying glasses on the TVs, that very 1950s aesthetic. I just think it all works really well. It's very analog. The fact that you've got physical telephones and screens and tubes and
the tubing,
yeah. So I really like that about
for
it.
The communication,
yeah, and you put them in there, off it goes. Yeah. So I like all that stuff, but the narrative is very, very messy. It's got some quite iconic moments, but yeah, as you said, the characters, especially Jolene, I think, Jonathon Pryce's character himself, Sam Lowry, I think they're probably the worst characters in the film because he is so meek in, like, this is one of his first breakout performances in film. I think it was his debut film. He'd been in dramas and stuff before and on stage, But he basically establishes the character he would then go on to play through every single one of his later films in his career, apart from maybe Carver in Tomorrow Never Dies.
Yeah.
And even then, he's still quite meek and quite cowardly as a villain. He's that kind of downtrodden, he seems to fit that role quite well. But this is kind of the template for that role I think he then carried on.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. By far, the visual design is the most striking aspect of the film. Like just both in terms of like the architecture and the set design, but also like in the dream sequences as well, where like the entire atmosphere and mood changes. Yeah, it
feels like Legend. Do you know what I mean? Or like Blade Runner, the unicorn sequences. It has that ethereal, dream-like, almost like Excalibur as well at times. That weird feel to it, which is quite separate from the main body
Excalibur. Yeah, I could see there's the parallels with Excalibur for sure. Yeah, I mean it has the same sort of colors, I would say, in the dream sequences that you see with Excalibur from memory. Yeah, I think that's
focus, the hard light coming off the armor, just that kind of general aesthetic fits it quite well. So yeah, I think that's one standout. I think the music's pretty good as well. At times it can be a bit like the whole end sequence. There's that industrial track, and I just don't like it. Just didn't like it. I don't
remember it at all. Actually, like I don't remember the music tracks at all.
It's not very musical. I think that's why. It's just very sounded very industrial to me. I just didn't quite fit with it. But for the most part, the music is pretty good. It's quite comedic, and you can see the Python in it as well. When we should back up and go through the initial story, I guess. So the first thing we see is blue skies and Sam Lowry's initial dream, basically. He's this knight with wings who's adorned in beautiful armor, who's trying to rescue a princess in a very, very classic, typical fairy tale story. And then we cut to the real world, as it were, somewhere in the 20th century. And we're moving through the streets, and we come to a television set that's it's almost a bit like the news part in RoboCop. It's got that feel about it. Very, very government driven. And then the rebellion, we see the terrorism happens. The TV shop explodes, and we already understand the dichotomy between how this world kind of works. But one of the funniest parts is, so before meeting Sam Lowry properly, we cut to an office inside the Ministry of Information. And some guy's typing away in his crappy little tiny office that's painted entirely grey with screens everywhere and machines and tubes. And he's trying to kill a fly. And he just climbs on top of this massive cabinet, hits this fly on the ceiling. And this fly tumbles down into a typewriter and alters the name Tuttle to the name Buttle. Clerical error. But in this world, that clerical error leads to the Ministry of Intelligence sending their militarized police unit to Harry Buttle's house, kidnapping him, essentially, putting him in a sack. Then this very polite English guy says, have you received your 57.74B form? Jesus, that's so Python. And then obviously
to the wife,
to the wife.
Her husband's just been taken away.
With the daughter.
Yeah.
And then she fills out the form and signs it under great duress. And he just casually says, and here's the receipt for your husband. Wow.
Yeah.
It just makes so much weird sense in that context that you would have to not only pay for the fact your husband was being removed, but get a receipt as if it was a product that had just happened. Wow, man.
That's the whole commentary on the bureaucracy that we touched on.
Yeah, that you apply to humanity itself. So the themes work quite well. At times, they're just quite convoluted. I really like De Niro as the, how would you describe him? Rebellion leader plumber? Plumber rebel? I don't know. Heating engineer, sorry, yeah. He's just like a breath of fresh air in this really dull world. Because, the world is really oppressive everywhere. I mean, even Sam Lowry's boss, played by Ian Holm, who has the best performance in the film, in my opinion. He's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, he's quite good.
He's a coward. He makes decisions for making decisions sense. So people that are in his workforce don't think he doesn't know what he's doing, so he just says yes or no to look like he does, and then he goes back in his own office and have I made the right choice? What's going on? Have I screwed it up? Could you help me not screw it up? I can't even sign this thing. Can you please sign this thing? And that's a bit later on where he forges a signature, and that's something else he gets taken down for, as it were, Sam Lowry. But Ian Holm is this jittery, nervy, quite slimy mess at times. He plays the character so sweetly in those scenes. Yeah, absolutely fantastically. He's almost like a surrogate father to Sam in a way. He kind of wants to protect him, but he's also 4.5 seconds away from stabbing him in the back. That weird dichotomy of that character. But yeah, Harry Tuttle is this hero heating engineer who leads this rebellion, which is utterly ludicrous and so very Monty Python. It takes something which is quite mundane as a job or an idea and turn it into this unique rebellion that's happening in the world. But yeah, so Sam has plumbing issues. His heating goes completely kaput and mental, and wiring starts popping out all over the house. And so he calls a plumber, and I think he's on the phone at the time, and it already cuts to Robert De Niro's feet next to the phone. He's like, "I'm here," and then he fixes all the wiring.
No, I mean first he calls like the government service, but it'll take them like 4 weeks or whatever.
And of course, Bob Hoskins shows up later.
Yeah, as the government plumber.
And he's really funny in that little minor role because they're both quite angry. Yeah. And
because
then
his heat, it's not plumbing. Like his heating goes.
Sorry, heating. Yeah.
In his apartment, Sam Lowry's, and then it's quite cold, so he has to call to get it fixed. And
quite hot because hasn't he got his head in the fridge?
Yeah, actually, yeah, it may be hot. I think it's that it's turned up. Yeah, maybe. But, yeah, the heating is turned up. So they have to get it fixed, but it'll take them too long, and he has several forms he has to fill for it. So he ends up. So Tuttle's character then has basically a police radio scanner or whatever, kind of, for intercepting these calls to the government heating service, and then he arrives in their stead at Sam's place.
Heating engineers. I love it. It's great. It's so weird. And one of the funny counterpoints is when Bob Hoskins does turn up and they are late, and they do then fuck everything up in the house anyway, just because they called this other guy that wasn't a government contractor. He sends him away the first time, just going by, "So I assume you've got Form 27-B." The other guy goes, "No, we haven't." "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm a stickler for procedures and processes, so you're going to have to go away and get that form." Again, tying into the overall systematic bureaucracy of the world. I found it difficult to, in any way, particularly like Jolene, and I think that's because we only rarely see her in that in like when she's coming in for the form bit, but the taxi bit when they first meet, and he's obviously been dreaming about her, and we only see her as that princess initially, and then she comes across as quite a independent, quite hard woman who will deal with difficult situations, but he's already in his mind.
She comes across as quite selfless as well, because she helps the widow of the guy who gets. She actually lives in the apartment upstairs of the widow of the woman who's married to Buttle, like Buttle's widow, who then Buttle gets dragged away, and she's upstairs seeing it, and then she tries to help the widow get answers for what happened to Mr. Buttle. Like that's why she actually goes to the Ministry of Information to get that information, and she risks herself doing that.
Yeah, I think I just don't find the character very engaging, and I think that's because she's not given enough screen time, and she's quite underwritten. I don't think her character's written wonderfully well.
No, I don't think she is. Yeah,
I think that and also the way Pryce, as we've said, Pryce in this is cowardly. He's meek. He runs away from his problems rather than facing them, and in this woman, in Jolene, he sees someone, because he's starting to become rebellious. He understands he lives in a dystopia, but his notion of rebellion is to follow what she does and believe that she is this great, this leader, this person who goes against the grain and goes against the norms. and he kind of places that on her when in fact she might not entirely be that, but in his mind, that's another escape for him.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that's accurate. He views her as his way out, as it were. I mean, he does reject, like, his mother is because apparently his father was a big to do with the government. He was very close with the current, like, leader of the government, the first minister or whatever he is. I forget. And so his mother is also quite, like, has a lot of prestige and a lot of clout, and she gets him a promotion, and he then turns down that promotion to stay with Ian Holm's character in that office, as another sort of act of rebellion.
Mention as well that the mother is, as a lot of the higher class hoi polloi in this film are, completely obsessed by plastic surgery. Now, of
Yeah,
course, in the 80s, it wasn't born, as it were, but it became massively popularized among
for
celebrities.
agelessness, like, yeah,
Exactly. And it reminded me a lot of, although it came earlier, it reminded me a lot of Escape from LA. But obviously inferior to New York. But one thing that Carpenter does in that is he has it's Bruce Campbell as this rogue plastic surgeon, and these people just keep coming back for more and more and more surgeries over and over again in this wanton hope for perfection that will never ever happen. In fact, they just obviously degrade and get worse. So again, you've got that theme in there as well, on top of the other themes of oppression and totalitarianism and militarized police and misinformation lost in a bureaucratic kind of wasteland of information. So I think that's maybe one of the problems with the films is it tries to deal with, they're not overly complex issues and they're not displayed that complexly, but there's so many of them, it kind of, it focuses, then it meanders and focuses, then it meanders and focuses, and it could just do with a bit more specific focus on a few of those themes, I think, at times.
yeah. I mean, I think one of the odd things about it too is the ending feels like it's just basically kind of ripped straight out of 1984,
Yeah.
where Sam gets captured by the Ministry of Information, and then there's this grand escape where he reunites with his love and so forth, and then it turns out that that's just in his head because he's been lobotomized by the system, and that's extremely similar to what happens to Winston in 1984, and in the movie.
Almost carbon copy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
and it feels really, really striking that it's so, like, beat by beat, almost identical.
yeah, there's not much which is dissimilar in that ending. I mean, the end. We should mention Jack Lint, who is the specialist in information retrieval, which is essentially torture, with a nice fancy branding instead, which is played by Michael Palin. He plays that beautifully for such a,
And is a close friend of Sam, ostensibly.
yeah, ostensibly, yeah, and he's the one who has to perform the procedure at the end, with a smile on his face, but not quite, with that weird baby mask. But that, yeah, the whole end sequence. He's captured. He has this massive dream sequence where he rescues the girl he's with. Harry Tuttle and crew, heating engineer extraordinaire, come down on wires through this massive building into the torture area, try on bungee lines and rescue him and fight off the corporate militarized police in the building and rescue Sam, and out they get and everything's fine. And then the dream starts falling apart when Harry Tuttle. So they all the information, all the paperwork, all the bureaucracy, they've blown up the building when Tuttle gives him the the TNT kind of explosives trigger,
Yeah,
and the building goes up, the paper all comes down. You're like, oh wow! So the end of the film is that they've destroyed bureaucracy, which is the obvious thing. And then of course Harry Tuttle in the street, the bureaucracy, literally as a metaphor, almost disintegrates the rebellion because it surrounds his face, covers his body, and when Sam goes over to try and pull it off him, he's gone. Yeah, so the film is almost quite cyclical in nature. He basically doesn't get fulfill the dream that he's been having, apart from in his own mind. He doesn't rebel against the system because he's too cowardly to, and he doesn't know how to break free of the bureaucracy that's kind of trapped him all his life. He thinks he can, but by the end, it all comes back in one great cyclical kind of narrative, and he's almost in a worse rebalance of the equilibrium than he was to begin with, which is not often the case. Normally the equilibrium is bettered by the end, but in this case it's definitely worsened, as it were.
Yeah, it's a movie that it's kind of weird to talk about because it's so at the same time it's so unique in a lot of its visual design and visual expression, even though it's also quite similar in some places. Like the office where one of the offices in the film is basically carbon copy out of like the trial where Joseph works. It's at the same time it's unique. It's also incredibly derivative. Like we touched on, where there are story elements and scenes that are almost beat for beat taken out of, like it's inspirational material. So it's just really really interesting dichotomy of uniqueness and repetition or derivation.
A derivation of prior works that are related, but then also it's actually not this. If you think about Gilliam's kind of directorial catalogue, Time Bandits. I mean, this is supposed to be kind of part of his fantasy trilogy-ish, as it were, but it's not really. Time Bandits, Baron von Munchausen, 12 Monkeys, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. All of these films, I mean, 12 Monkeys might be the most similar in many ways, but just kind of with
with this dystopian
time travel
future
thrown in. Yeah, it's not like any of them are wholly unique, but it's like this split between derivative or genre tropes or narrative tropes or thematics we've seen before, and then this kind of Gilliam across the top, where the visuals are unique, or like Fear and Loathing. It's just a road movie. I know it's based on his book, Hunter S. Thompson's book, but it is just essentially a road movie. It does a lot of what a road movie does, but the way it's shot, the drug trips and all that kind of stuff is very Gilliam. And you get that with a lot of his films, I think. But I think this might be the most tipping towards derivative as compared to the others. I think that might just be the fact that the whole film is really aping the trial in 1984.
Yeah.
And you can't kind of break out of that mold. But then you can have the visual lettuce and perhaps the characterizations, although sometimes a little bit weak, that are wholly unique to that particular film.
Of course, much of that is also owed to the fact that both The Trial and 1984 are such like genre-defining works in and of themselves that so much that came since is derived from them. But,
and like Blade Runner, this is quite an influential film. I mean, it's
yeah, visually, for sure.
Yeah, and even things like even Equilibrium with Christian Bale has elements of this in it. It's a very different film. It's essentially The Matrix, but it's got that layer of totalitarianism, the militarized police, the oppressive environment, the grey buildings, the bureaucracy, all those things. So a lot of what Brazil talks about has seeped from 1984 and The Trial, and kind of has seeped into a lot of other stuff as well. I think it's probably more palatable for a modern audience to understand this kind of concept, as opposed to watching 1984. I think it might be a bit easier might be a bit more palatable, perhaps.
I don't know, because I mean that maybe, but I mean, there is the whole thing with Gilliam with the dream sequences and like the hit. Sort of heightened absurdity to it that I think might make it a little less approachable.
And I guess if you can't click with Python either, this is a very, very dark. This is more like Meaning of Life, or even darker than Meaning of Life, really. But it's not like the playful kind of Python.
I didn't really get much of a Python sense from it, for my part. Really.
There's moments, I think, the absurdity of things.
Only at certain moments, yeah. But like by and large, it felt very, very removed from like the Parton type of absurdity, and more. It was much more like the absurdity of bureaucracy, in its very nature.
It felt very cold as a film at times. It's quite, as you said, it's quite detached.
Yes,
it reminded me of.
It's an institutional absurdity that's very far removed from the absurdity of, and now for something completely different.
Oh, yeah, very, very much. It reminded me a little bit. I think we talked about it very briefly before. The opening to A Meaning of Life. I'm going to get this wrong. I think it is A Meaning of Life. Has got a series of short films. It might even be prior to Brazil on a special edition I watched, but there's a short film they made where two corporate buildings are actually ships, and their CEOs are captains, and they're floating down what looks like New York, attacking each other. And it's got just a little bit of that about it. I can see why this idea came about from the 1984s and from the trial and from other things as well. And then also with the absurdity in there of Gilliam's mind and the kind of stuff he can come up with in relation.
I mean, it's
to
also worth
Python.
mentioning that, as you touched on, like the script originally was by Tom Stoppard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And stuff. So it's not like it. It's not really Python writing in it.
No, very much. Stoppard's a playwright.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's why maybe Gilliam struggled initially with the drafts, because he, like I said, he did 3 drafts. And I mean, one thing he said they changed when he passed it off to his friend was Harry Tuttle's character was actually quite nasty. It's actually not very nice at all. And Gilliam said, no, I want this guy, I want this terrorist to be as nice as humanly possible, because that's what will make the character work.
Yeah,
if
it
he's
contrasts
not that,
with the system.
Exactly. If he's not that, then he just becomes part of the oppressive system, as the system is anyway, just the opposition to it. So I think it's just little things like that. I think he probably just rubbed off the hard edges.
Yeah.
Stoppard's was probably too serious when he wanted that undercurrent of absurdity to be a bit more exposed, and a little bit nicer. I like Brazil. It's not something I'm going to want to watch again for quite a long time. I definitely think it was more disjointed than I remember. I always knew the characters weren't massively strong. Like, they're almost caricatures in many ways. They're not wonderfully 3-dimensional, and the dream sequences still seem out of place, very out of place. Not
Right,
even in a Blade Runner unicorn way, which I've seen directors cut so many times now it feels part of the film. But yeah, it's one of those films that you should all give a watch to, and you'll all understand the concept.
Certainly, if you're interested in film, or if you have any intention on making films or studying film, I think Brazil is certainly part of the curriculum.
It's got great cast, as we said. It's got some amazing set design, aesthetic. The costumes are very film noir, and kind of almost feel like they could span 20, 30 years and be quite timeless, which works really, really well. It's got some bright, nice character moments. The music's pretty good throughout, apart from a few moments here and there. But just be aware if you are going to watch it, it is a bit too long. You are going to get bored here and there, I think. Things drag out too much. You are going to wonder occasionally, why is that character even doing the thing they're doing? How does that tie into the overall kind of plot? And sometimes it's a bit too convoluted. And I do think thematically, almost everything, in fact, everything it's talking about is still hugely prevalent now. And even more so in the last 2 or 3 weeks.
It is largely because, both the trial and 1984 are hugely relevant today.
Of course.
Still, like they are unfortunately, because of much of like the institutions we've built, they are timeless for the world.
Yeah,
we have.
and it'll continue to be so as long as we live in the kind of capitalistic, totalitarian sometimes world in which we live in. And the stuff about information. Look at where we are now with.
It's not even just like capitalistic. It's just institutional, because institutions are what really sort of bring bureaucracy, not necessarily capitalism in and of itself, but institutions. Whether that institution is, you have bureaucracies with labor unions too. You have bureaucracies in every single institution that we create.
Of course, man. Hell, I'm a teacher. I know that
they have to be administrated.
Yeah, and in a world in which you're having to do a form for a secondary form for a tertiary form that you have to triplicate and then send to 8 different people, that's the absurd world in which we live in. Unfortunately, now it's just done digitally rather than paper based. I just throw my emails at you instead. But yeah, I recommend it. It's a great, cool film. It's got some amazing moments in it. As you said, I think if you are a lover of film and you want to study film, great place to go and look, because there's so many nice techniques. And Gilliam is just a really inventive director. He's probably one of Britain's most inventive directors. And some of the work he produced after Time Bandits and this just gets better and better in my bit. Fear and Loathing and 12 Monkeys.
He's sort of caught in between American and British cinema.
Which is a really unique place and perspective to come from. because you're straddling a line between different types of humor. Although the themes are very similar, the kind of our notion of 1984 in America and Britain are quite different, and looked at somewhat differently, and that's what this film does as well. Quite an interesting balance of stuff that Gilliam tries to say and show.
Yeah, I mean, he has a very unique perspective and point of view, which is one reason why I don't think his films are always like the most brilliant or necessarily masterpieces, but they're always interesting.
Yeah, and that's something that you can never be accused of being boring. You're never going to sit down and watch a Terry Gilliam film and walk away and go, "Oh man, nothing really happened in that film."
I think it's a different kind of boredom, because I mean, Brazil did eventually bore me a little bit, just because of how long it was. Like it got too long. But it's a different. Even as you're bored, you're still kind of fascinated by what's going on.
It's overlong sequences with him, though, with replicated techniques rather than the mundane nature of what you're watching. I think that's the problem, isn't it? It's not like you're watching something tedious on screen. It's just that it's something which is repeated so often and become too extended that then you become a bit bored of the techniques and what you're seeing used.
I think
content is still interesting.
It's kind of similar to Malick a bit in that way. Terrence Malick.
Malick, yeah. Badlands is a very good example.
Yeah.
And the Thin Red Line as well. That's both of them are excruciatingly long, and at times.
Yeah, Tree of Life too.
Yeah, hey man, I'm like you. I love long shots. I love long takes. If they mean something and they don't go on for so long that you're like, well, I don't know why it's lasting this long now. You've made your point. So that's the problem with a lot of those films. Yeah, I think with this, it's just too much of repeated technique and sequence length. But hey, guys, look, go and watch Brazil. It's an incredibly interesting film. It's very, very unique. And its themes, all of them, are still universally applicable, as Silver said, along with 1984 and The Trial. So go and give it a watch. It's a very, very surreal, dreamlike, weird, odd. I don't know how to finish the sentence. Film. That'll do.
Yeah, Odyssey, like Sam Lowry's Odyssey, sort of.
Yeah. The journey of a mundane, meek, cowardly man to lobotomization. It's a good film. Right. What then have you decided that we shall be viewing next week, good sir?
I've kind of struggled with that about a lot. I've gone back and forth between a lot of different films. But I figured maybe we should go to something fun. So we will be going to my favorite superhero movie, which is 1993's The Shadow with Alec Baldwin and John Logan.
I did not expect that. Very interesting. God, I haven't seen The Shadow for years, man.
Yeah,
years
I love that
and
film.
years. Wow.
I think it's one of the most underrated superhero films ever made, certainly.
You completely blindsided me there. I didn't expect you to ever utter the word superhero on this show. I thought it'd be like, well, this week, because we couldn't watch Akira Kurosawa's Run, I've decided that Fellini's 8.5 might be a good place to start. But no. Superhero movie. Okay, I like that idea. We'll watch that in the next few days. I'm well up for something a bit lighter-hearted and fun.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Me too, honestly.
Yeah, I think it's the right time for it, given everything going on in the world.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe we'll do a few fun films in the next few weeks, and then we'll get back to our typical black and white, stoic, 3-hour-long discussion of poverty in Italy or something. I don't know. Oh man. Okay. Well, that sounds brilliant to me. Wow, The Shadow. God, I've got so many weird ideas about what to do after it now. I'll have to have a think. All right. Thank you so much for watching, guys. That's been great. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion of Brazil. Go and watch it. Talk to us in the comments if you've seen it and what your thoughts about the film are and what your thoughts about Gilliam as a director are. Don't forget, we're on YouTube for our main stuff. And we're also on Anchor, Spotify, and iTunes for the audio versions of these podcasts, which I'm still trying to catch up to the main podcast. But as you all know, I am crap at doing so. I have been Citizen Sleeve, and this has been
Silver Hawkins.
Take it very much easy, and we'll see you for the next Last Edit podcast.
Take care, everyone.